Welcome back to this explainer. Okay, let's dive right in. Deep inside your head, resting right there on the ventral surface of your brain, around the third ventricle, is a command center. And it's tiny, literally just a millimeter wide. Now, it might be totally microscopic in the grand scheme of your anatomy, but it dictates absolutely everything from your physical height and your reproductive capabilities, all the way to how your body handles extreme stress. We're talking, of course, about the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. To truly wrap our heads around how this works, we're going to use a metaphor. I want you to think of your body as this massive biological corporation. The hypothalamus, that's your CEO, sitting up in the corner office. The pituitary gland represents the middle managers. And the rest of your organs, well, they're the frontline workers. Today, we're going to explore exactly how the CEO communicates with the managers to keep the entire enterprise of you running smoothly. And maybe more importantly, what happens when those lines of communication break down?
So here is our roadmap for the explainer. We'll map out the control room, cover the rules of the system, meet the hormones, look at system failures and rogue managers, and then we'll wrap up by playing medical detective. Section 1, the body's control room, the CEO, and the middle managers. We really need to look closely at the architecture of this command center because its physical anatomy actually dictates exactly how the signals are sent. The pituitary gland is divided into two distinct halves, and the CEO treats them totally differently. The anterior pituitary is of endodermal origin. The hypothalamus sends its releasing hormones, like TRH or GnRH, down this really short private portal system. Because the distance is literally just a few millimeters, the CEO only needs to send tiny amounts of these peptides to get the anterior pituitary into here. But the posterior pituitary, completely different story. It's actually made of neuronal tissue. It's essentially just an extension of the hypothalamus itself. Here, hormones like oxytocin and vasopressin are dumped straight into the general circulation. To make sure these signals actually reach distant targets like the kidney or the uterus, the posterior side gets massive, bulk shipments of hormones. Moving right along to Section 2, rules of the system, the corporate feedback loop. To keep this incredibly complex biological corporation running without spinning totally out of control, we absolutely need strict rules. And the entire system relies on constant, unrelenting status reports from the frontline workers back up to the CEO. The crucial mechanism keeping this whole shebang together is negative feedback. You can think of it like the thermostat in your house, or a status report hitting the CEO's desk saying, "Hey, the job is done. You can stop sending instructions now." When the pituitary tells an organ to produce a product, like a steroid for instance, that very product travels right back up to the brain to hit the brakes and inhibit further signals. It's an elegant way to maintain perfect equilibrium. The workflow of a biological signal is incredibly precise. Step 1, the hypothalamus sends a releasing factor to the pituitary. Step 2, the pituitary sends a stimulating hormone down to the end organ. Step 3, the end organ does its job and releases a product. And Step 4, that product flows right back up to Steps 1 and 2, hitting the brakes. All right, Section 3, meet the hormones, the three departments. Let's actually introduce you to these middle managers, the hormones of the anterior pituitary gland. These are the critical messengers taking the CEO's orders and translating them into action across your entire body. The anterior pituitary basically groups its workers into three families based on their physical structure. Group 1, you've got your single-chain polypeptides. That's growth hormone and prolactin. Group 2 are the glycoproteins, TSH for the thyroid and LH and FSH for the gonads. Now, they all share an identical alpha chain but have a unique beta chain. Because they're structurally related, there's some fascinating overlap here. For instance, in early pregnancy, the placenta produces massive amounts of HCG to maintain the pregnancy. Well, because HCG is structurally so similar to TSH, in rare cases of extreme HCG overproduction, it can actually accidentally stimulate the thyroid. It's like a weird corporate mix-up. Finally, Group 3 comes from one giant precursor molecule called POMC, which gets chopped up to create ACTH, the manager in charge of your adrenal glands and your stress response. And here's where it gets really interesting. We can actually manipulate these managers. Take GnRH, which pulses about every hour to stimulate the reproductive system. If doctors administer a continuous high dose of a GnRH analog, it just overwhelms the system and essentially shuts it down. So why does this matter? Well, consider the numbers 500 versus 50. The average Western woman experiences about 500 lifetime menstrual cycles, compared to about 50 for women in third world countries who have earlier pregnancies and prolonged periods of breastfeeding. That super high number of cycles directly correlates with higher risks of breast and ovarian cancer.
By using GnRH analogs to intentionally turn off the system, medical science is actually exploring ways to dramatically reduce those cancer risks. Let's move to Section 4, when the system fails, hypopituitarism and dysfunction. What happens when the CEO or the managers just go offline? When this delicate system breaks down, we get a condition called hypopituitarism, and the fallout is severe. The symptoms depend really heavily on your age. In children, it usually presents as severe growth retardation or delayed puberty. In adults, you might see sexual dysfunction, decreased muscle bulk, overwhelming fatigue, or a really dangerous drop in blood pressure. And what's fascinating is that the managers don't just all quit at once. Growth hormone and the gonadotropins, FSH and LH, are usually the very first to fail, followed later by ACTH and TSH. But, sometimes the problem isn't the manager at all. It's the frontline workers refusing to listen. Take laryngoorphism, for example. These individuals have very short stature, but if you test their blood, they actually have plenty of growth hormone. So what's the problem? Well, it's a genetic defect in the growth hormone receptor itself. The manager is screaming the orders, but the frontline workers are completely deaf to the signal. They never actually produce IGF-1, which is the factor that causes growth. So in this specific case, giving them synthetic growth hormone, it won't help at all. Which brings us to Section 5, tumors and hypersecretion, rogue managers. This is the exact opposite problem. Sometimes the middle managers just go totally rogue, usually due to tumors that cause massive, uncontrolled hypersecretion of specific hormones. The crucial thing to understand here is that both of these conditions, gigantism and acromegaly, are caused by the exact same thing, a rogue pituitary tumor pumping out massive amounts of growth hormone. The only difference, it's all about timing. If the tumor strikes in a child before the growth plates in their long bones have fused together, they grow incredibly tall, resulting in gigantism. But if that exact same tumor develops in an adult, well, after those bones have fused, they physically can't grow taller. Instead, their skin, jaw, hands, and feet thicken and enlarge. That's a condition called acromegaly, and it brings along some really dangerous complications, like an enlarged heart and glucose intolerance. Another rogue manager we see a lot involves prolactin, the hormone that sustains lactation. Prolactinomas are actually the most common pituitary tumors. But get this, you don't even need a prolactin-producing tumor to have sky-high prolactin levels. Remember the CEO, the hypothalamus? It's constantly sending dopamine down the portal stalk to inhibit prolactin. So if literally any tumor grows large enough to just press on that stalk and physically block the blood flow, the dopamine never arrives. Without that suppression, prolactin levels just absolutely skyrocket. We call this the stalk effect. Even certain psychiatric drugs or extreme, severe stress can cause this exact same hypersecretion. Finally, Section 6, playing medical detective, auditing the system. Because these hormone levels aren't just sitting still, they fluctuate wildly all day like volatile stock prices. Doctors have to get incredibly creative to audit this system. So how do you test a moving target? Well, you definitely can't just rely on a single blood test. Growth hormone, for example, releases in these intense bursts, particularly right after you fall asleep. If a doctor draws your blood at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday and finds 0 growth hormone, that might be 100% normal, or it might mean you're totally deficient. A single random blood test is practically useless here. We have to test this moving target using dynamic function tests. To figure this out, doctors use what's called the triple bolus test. It's basically pulling the biological fire alarm in your body. Doctors inject TRH, GnRH, and insulin all at the exact same time. The insulin causes the patient's blood sugar to just crash, inducing a state of hypoglycemic stress. Then they take blood samples serially over 90 minutes to see if all 6 departments of the anterior pituitary react appropriately to the sudden emergency. Because they are literally inducing a crash in blood sugar, this requires intense, close medical supervision with injectable glucose standing by just in case. Alternatively, they can play tricks on the feedback loop using drugs like medirapone. See, medirapone blocks the very last step of cortisol production in the adrenal glands. Naturally, blood cortisol levels just plummet. If the system is healthy, the pituitary gland should notice this lack of negative feedback, absolutely panic, and start screaming at the adrenals by spiking its production of ACTH. If that ACTH doesn't spike, the doctor immediately knows the pituitary manager is asleep at the wheel. So let's bring this all together. Your body's incredible stability, your ability to grow, to reproduce, to survive extreme stress, it literally all relies entirely on this delicate, continuous conversation. It's this beautiful, constant loop of positive signals and negative feedback flowing between a tiny control room in your brain and the rest of your organs. To wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this thought. We've mapped out growth hormone, TSH, prolactin, and ACTH. We know how they work. But if such a microscopic cluster of cells holds the reins to everything from our bone density to our panic responses, what other hidden biological memos are flowing through that tiny portal system right now, shaping our lives in ways we haven't even discovered yet?